Welcome, everybody. This is Burton Edwin Tew Jr., my dad, and we're on a cruise today. And we're going to just take some time I'm going to ask him some questions. These questions are 120 questions to ask your parents before it's too late. Okie dokie, Dad. A lot of this you already have on your history. So we won't elaborate a whole lot, but it gives the viewer a chance to see you, not just read. So the first one, of course, is what day you were born.
June the 5th of 1928.
Okay. And where were you born?
Benjamin, Utah County, Utah.
Why was your family living there? You can look at the folks over here. This is your posterity that's listening to this.
Well, because my grandma lived down there, and so in those days, why people weren't born in hospitals, they were born in homes mostly, and so my mother went to her mother's place, and that's where I was born, was at Grandma Lundell's house.
So you were living there at the time? You were just born
down there for the birth, yeah.
I gotcha. Okay. And can you tell us 2 or 3 other places that your family lived while you were growing up and why they lived there?
Well, the first place was in the old home place, and that was in Mapleton. And my dad lived there because he was helping his dad and mom and had promised to do so before they died, until they died. And so he was helping his dad and mom on the old home place down from Maple Canyon.
Okay, so they lived in Maple Canyon, or just down from there. What's the second place while you were growing up?
Over in the Maelstrom place, which is on the south end of town, and that's where I spent most of my young life, was there because my grandma and grandpa died, and the estate was divided up amongst the 7 surviving children, and so Dad took his inheritance, which wasn't much, considering what he'd done for his parents that the other kids didn't do, and Grandma Lundell loaned Dad money so that he was able to go on the south end of town, buy the Maelstrom place, and start life over there.
Okay. And how long had they been married at that point, when they had a place of their own?
About 13 years.
Okay. By the way, folks, when Dad and I move back and forth, it's not because we're drunk. It's because the ship is moving. All right. Let's see. How about, how old were you when you were baptized?
8.
8. And where was that at?
In Springville First Ward.
And what do you remember about that?
Well, I wasn't baptized by my dad. I was baptized by a fellow by the name of Clough Hopla, who was a priest there, and so they gave him a chance to use
Were you close to him, or was there a reason?
No, he just was given a chance to baptize so many children and exercise his priesthood in baptism, being a priest while he was authorized to baptize.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. And when were you married?
On September 26th, 1952.
And where did you meet Grandma? Or that is my mom. Grandma for some of you. BYU, right?
What was your question?
Where did you meet your wife?
Yeah, down at BYU, yeah.
Okay. So that's where they met. And could you tell us who your parents, the names of your parents, and then the names of your grandparents?
Yeah,
Keep going.
my parents' names were Burton Edwin Tew Sr., that's Dad, and my mother's maiden name was, well, her name was Leah Carolina Lundell Tew.
And notice my sister's name is Leah.
And and then their parents in turn were Dad's parents were William Thomas Tew and Clara Elizabeth Snow Tew, and on the mother's side it was let's see. Well, the mother was Hannah Nilsson, and the father was
maybe we'll come back to that. Let's take a second and have you go through those grandparents that you mentioned. Maybe you'll remember the other one, and tell just the most memorable thing that comes to your mind about that grandparent.
Grandparent or great grandparent? Grandparent.
You're in your case, great or grandparent. Yeah.
Grandparent. Well.
Like Hannah.
Well, no, that was a great grandparent. Grandparents, were in the case of Dad's dad, it was, as I mentioned, it was Thomas. It was William Thomas Tew. He was a bishop in Mapleton, which only had one ward at that time, and he was a bishop for 24 years in a row, from 1896 to 1920, and many people only knew one bishop in that length of time. And,
wow, that's definitely something to remember about William Thomas Tew.
And his wife was Clara Elizabeth Snow Tew, and her dad in turn.
Well, wait a second, and tell us something about Clara Elizabeth Snow Tew that you remember from your growing up years. Something about her.
Well, she was a very nice woman, and we lived in her house, where at least her and her husband's house, for years, and she treated us right, and but yet in another way, why she wasn't near as close to us as my other grandmother, actually, is Grandma Lundell, who we only saw, weekly usually. With Grandma Tew, she was just very nice, and but was always busy, and so she didn't spend as much time with us much. But Grandma Lundell seemed to spend a lot more time and take personal interest in us more than Grandma Tew did. But I haven't got any bad things to say.
So Grandma Lundell would be your great grandma?
No, that'd be my grandma.
Oh, okay.
My mother's mother.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Hi. You're wondering about housekeeping?
Yes.
I'm just recording right now, so give us about half an hour or 45 minutes. I'm
Okay, we just.
recording my dad's history.
No problem. We just leave a note for you that you can call. Then after that, you can somebody will speak.
Yeah, I'd love for you to do it. Maybe in about, is that okay? About 45 minutes. I'm just tape recording my dad.
No problem. I just leave you this number.
Thank you.
If you have any plan to go out, just call this number.
Okay.
If we are not around anymore.
Awesome. Thank
Okay,
you.
well,
Thank you. Okay,
Have
bye.
a nice day.
Thanks. Sorry about that. that was housekeeping. They'll come back later. Okay, so we learned a little bit about grandmas and grandpas and your memories of them. And so now, as far as your own parents go, maybe if you could share with us, for the purposes of this recording, one memory that's the fondest of your mom and your dad. I know with Grandpa, especially, you have tons, but there are a lot in Dad's history. But let's see if you can just share with us something. One of your most favorite memories of your mom and dad.
Well, Dad, he is the man I think the most of anybody in the world. He always treated me fair in every way, and I tried my best to do what he wanted done. And he was not tyrannical in any way. He was just fair and willing to praise us when we do good, and that's an important thing. And he'd do it, and just an ideal dad. That's all. And I'll never say any words against Dad, because I think so much of him.
You know, I'm going to just put a little note in for myself. When I was growing up, Grandpa, who my dad's referring to, he always was fun to go visit because he'd take me on his lap and he'd smile and his blue eyes would just twinkle and his hair was so white. and Dad's right. I always felt very, very loved when I was in my Grandpa Tew's presence.
And I did as a child, you know. And he'd take us to church, and as much as what he had a chance to do. We only owned one car, but he would a lot of times forego important things to him so I could have the car to go on a date or things like that, you know. I think he was a great man.
What about your mother?
Well, she was a good, fine woman, but she had a temper, and boy, if we did anything wrong, it seemed like she'd emphasize the negative too darn much, and so I just never did feel as close to my mom as I did to my dad. I haven't got anything bad to say about her. She was a faithful woman in the church, but she really didn't develop some of the skills maybe that she should have for child rearing, because she'd easily get mad, and I always had a kind of a feeling that way that is unfortunate, that I had kind of some bit of negativity about my mom.
Well, I'm going to interject a positive comment about my grandma. I've never met her. She had died by the time I was born. But
Yeah.
my dad got this book, and she had written it.
Oh, yeah.
All these thoughts, these poems and thoughts and collections. It was easy to see that her desire was to be positive and to be to be inspirational. Now, what maybe caused her to have difficulty with that, I'm not sure. But I know that in her heart of hearts, she was an amazing, very positive person and collected positive things.
Yeah, that's right. She did that, but and there's good things to say, you know. And she baked bread, and she put up fruit, 1,100 quarts a year she put up. And
wow, I put up 0, thank you.
and she And I could say she always baked our bread and did a good job, but still, I wished I didn't have the degree of negativity.
I have a feeling when this life is over and done with, you'll be able to see her in a whole new light.
Yeah, I think so.
Now let's talk a minute about how your grandparents passed away, and your parents, and how that affected you. Let's begin with your grandparents, and then talk about how your parents passed away and how that happened. I mean, was it of old age? Was it in other unusual?
Grandpa, he was thrown off in a load of hay, and it had a bad effect on his neck, and he never did get over that. And
how long did it take before he passed away after the accident?
Oh, a few months.
Oh, wow.
And
awful.
he mentally, got into kind of a bad state, and then some of his children made kind of deals to try to get money from the estate. That my dad took care of his parents, and he didn't go out on his own, because he'd promised them to take care of them, and he did. And
so there were feelings after your grandpa died.
And when the time came to divvy up, there was no consideration given to Dad, which there should have been for all this time, 13 years of taking care of his parents, wherein all the other kids got a chance to get ahead in the world and get started, and my mother felt bad about that and didn't
make things any
feel
better.
Bad about telling Dad that she felt bad about it. And
so, in other words, when William Thomas Tew passed away, it was a difficult, painful thing. It took a couple of months, and he had a neck injury that would have caused great pain.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
After he died, then there were feelings amongst the siblings.
That's right.
So that's unfortunate that's how that happened. How about his wife? How about your grandmother?
Well, she passed away, and
in what way? With old age, was it?
I don't know for sure.
Can't remember. Okay.
Can't remember exactly, but it was just 3 years later.
Okay.
She died 3 years after her husband died.
Okay. How about on the other side for Leah? And one thing you want to know is that Leah Lundell, the family came over from Sweden. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dad's grandma on that side, I don't think she spoke English, did she?
Oh, she did, yeah.
Oh, she did. Okay, but
it was
she
her
spoke
husband
Swedish.
that had the trouble with the English.
Okay.
And I never did know him, and neither did Dad. When there was a couple of years that my dad could have been introduced to Leah's dad, and she wouldn't take him inside the home because she was ashamed of the fact that he had such a thick accent.
Oh, that's so sad.
And so she never did, and Dad had always felt bad about it because Leah never did introduce them, and he died on Christmas Day, and I never knew him, and Dad never knew him, even though he was alive for a couple of years.
Well, so we've just shared a couple of sad stories with you, but on a lighter note, when Grandpa passed away, it was sad to see Grandpa pass away, or my dad's dad, but it wasn't as lingering. His death was more sudden, wasn't it?
I think so.
For Burton Edwin Tew Sr. is who we're talking about.
But with Grandma, when Grandma passed away, Grandma Lundell, I know it was in December, I guess it was, and I felt so close to her And I really loved her a lot because she always did, pay attention to us and help us, and then anyways, and so I just felt like the day that when she was buried, I felt like that God just made that day special for her because it was such a mild and beautiful day in the middle of the winter,
Wow.
And I thought, boy,
That's who she was. That's what she was like.
That was why it was the kind of day it was to reward Grandma Lundell.
That's awesome.
So Grandma Lundell is one of the ones that when I die, that I'd be looking forward to seeing. But she had a daughter that was similar to that. Her daughter's name was Martha.
Oh, really? You've never mentioned that before.
And
that would have been your aunt.
Mm-hmm.
Aunt Martha.
Yeah.
And did she speak both Swedish and English?
I think so, yeah. And my mother spoke both Swedish and English, but she never taught any of the Swedish to any of her children, to any of the rest of us, because I guess she felt so bad about the fact that her dad couldn't speak decent English.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your mother had an unusual way to pass away as well.
Well, yeah, she had went out and had thin shoes, and she stepped back onto a garden rake, and a rake tine went up through her shoes into her foot, and Dad always felt bad about it. But he mentioned, and she refused to go down and have a tetanus shot. And then when tetanus came on to her, and the doctors and everybody in Utah got as much anti-tetanus, medicine as possible. And then Dad told us, he says, well, she's past the crisis and she's going to live all right. And we felt so good about that. But it was right in the middle of the war, because it was 1943. And anybody that had any very much smarts about medical was off helping in the war, And that left the hospitals with just kind of
inadequately trained personnel.
That's right, inadequate. And so the way she died, my mother, the way she died, these idiots over at the hospital gave her a plate of food, and I guess they shut the door even, and she choked on her food and died. And it was just really stupid hospital inadequacies, because as far as the tetanus is concerned, that is the lockjaw, why
she was over the crisis.
Overcome that, really, and Dad said she's going to die and going to live and just be all right. And she would have. And in today's world, they would have put her in intensive care, but then they didn't do nothing for her except just let her die by choking on her own food. Right. And of course, tetanus, lockjaw is a nerve disease, and you can go into convulsions with it, and that's what she did. Went into a convulsion and choked on her food and died.
Wow. That must have been really, really hard for you to have your mom pass away. And how old were you?
And for Dad, too, and all of us, all the children.
How old were you at the time?
14.
Wow.
I was the oldest child.
Well, tell us a little bit about the names of your children and what they do.
Well, of my children? Well, my wife and I, our children are
And where they live.
Leah Ann, the oldest, and she lives in a mansion-like home in Salt Lake City, right on the top of the city, overlooking the city. She's been extremely successful as a realtor. And the next is Patricia, the one that's doing this with me, and she lives in Murray right now. She has lived quite a few years in West Jordan and a few other places, but she was the most faithful, I'm sure, of anybody as far as the gospel is concerned, and we just wish we had a bunch of others just like her. She's a splendid girl, and her family is coming along real good in the church, and her husband's a real fine man and successful. Leah Ann had an unfortunate first marriage, and it required a divorce. And then she remarried a non-Mormon, and so there isn't any churchiness with Leah Ann. But Gary has treated her very well, and is a fine man, but he's non-Mormon, and therefore the church bit isn't in their life. And the next one is Cynthia, and
Dad, if you might, or if you'd feel better kind of going back on the pillows and relaxing a little bit more instead of up like this, you can.
Oh, okay, this is all right.
Okay.
So Cynthia, she's the third daughter, and that's what all we had at that point was daughters, and she got a brain tumor that threatened her life, and she was age 18. My younger sister had a brain tumor, and she died of her brain tumor. But Cindy, they had all kind of fasts for her in the church and in the school and everywhere. So therefore she never died. She stayed living and has been living with her brain tumor ever since, which is her age now is about 51, and that's an awful long time from when she was 18. But she was extremely brilliant in school, had about as good a record as anybody could have had. This had a bad effect, as you might imagine, on her mental capability, the influence of the cancer on her brain. And she had treatments on her cancer with radiation, and she's faithful. She goes to church and that type of thing, but she can't have any children because of the effects of the brain tumor on her reproductive system and so on. So she's now got troubles of falling and doing herself damage in falling, and we have to watch that carefully, and her mother especially has to go to all odds and lengths to try to protect her the best we can.
Now a little bit more about Cindy. She actually did get married at one point.
She was married for 10 years or so, and I didn't think they'd ever get off their honeymoon. They treated each other so well, even though it was obvious that she may never be able to have children. But then, unfortunately, and I don't know all the reasons why her husband, who had been a very good Mormon and a very good student of Mormonism, he became convinced that the church was in error and that he had missed part of his life that he should have had in doing things that people in general enjoy doing, like getting drunk. And so he figured that he was going to want to do that kind of thing. And he swore Cindy to secrecy until the time came that he wanted to tell us and his parents what his conclusion was. But before that time came, why, he grabbed a handgun and shot himself to death in their own home in Salt Lake. So Cindy, she had the double tragedy of her brain cancer and also of her husband's suicide.
So I've always felt like that it was Cindy's challenges are a combination of physical from the tumor as well as the emotional that she's had to live through.
Now the other kids, now we started having, after the 3 girls, then we had 3 boys. The oldest of those was Barton Hal. It's named after a missionary companion that I thought a lot of. And he was a fine, splendid young man. But unfortunately, at the age of 7, he fell out of the back of our camper and hit his head in the wrong way and badly injured his brain stem. And the doctor said that he was brain dead. And a week later, why, he died. So that was our oldest son.
And one more part of that story is that back then giving organs wasn't a very common thing, but Mom and Dad allowed his organs to be given, and someone lives in California now because of Bart.
Yeah, because he was given one of his kidneys to a young mother in San Francisco. Yep, that's right. And then the next one was David Mark, and he did a good job on his mission to Chile and was a good member of the church, but then he kind of got listening to others and got in a bad way, gave up going to church and never has gone to church. So that's too bad. And that's the way it is right now. And then the last one was Ronald Burton, and he did a splendid job on his mission to Palmyra area to New York, and brought a lot of members of the church in, and then he got also in a kind of a bad situation, and I don't think Paul did a lot of good for him either, and other events that resulted in his inactivity. But he unfortunately, to our viewpoint, not necessarily married, but he had 3 women that he had children by. The one woman he had 5 by, another woman he had 2 by, and then another woman he had 1 by, so that makes 8 children that he has responsibility for.
And we will say that he's a wonderful dad. He really loves his kids, and he tries to do all that he can to be a good dad for them.
Yeah, that's right. Even though he's in church, he shoulders responsibility well, and has still got a lot of responsibility though, because some of the ones are pretty young. The younger 5, anyway. He's got 3 that are pretty well grown and on their own now, but the other 5, why, he's got some pretty heavy responsibility for them.
Which brings us to their next question, which is, if you could share with us the names of your grandchildren and where they're living and what they're doing. You've got quite a few grandchildren to go through.
21.
So let's see if Dad can do this. 21 grandkids. Just briefly, the names, which of your children they belong to, and what they're doing.
Well, Leah Ann's children, she has 4, I guess, 4 children. She has Tony and Kevin and Andrew and Jonna. Those are the 4 that she has. And Tony is and none of her children is much at all LDS, because she never taught them that way at all. And but Tony's married and is doing okay.
And has a child, Nika.
Yeah, well, yeah, she's married and has a child of her own now, and is financially they're moderately doing well, and then Kevin, he's been a bartender and a car salesman, and kind of shoved around a lot. Hasn't done anything very grandiose. Nice, reasonably nice kid, but
His wife's Tracy.
he's very pleasant, but he hasn't went out and really done anything too much. Now Andrew, he never did get married, but he got a job in the gas industry, and was making a pile of money living down in, he lived back in Massachusetts and New York, and I guess now he lives down in California, and is very successful in that industry, and is extremely well paid apparently.
And we're all hoping. He's had moments that he makes us think maybe he's going to get married, so we haven't given up hope
He
yet.
needs to get married. He's plenty old enough to get married, but I guess he doesn't have it in mind too heavy. And so that's
And there's Jonna.
and Jonna, she married a non-LDS, but she has, I guess, 2 children.
In Washington.
Yeah, they live in Washington State and have a good, successful marriage, just fine. Very pleasant girl, and willing to.
Her children, Allie is one. I'm trying to remember her second.
Yeah, so that's Leah Ann. Now, Patty, she has, I guess, 5 children, one of which is adopted, and she's had trouble with him in a lot of ways, the adoptee, and so she's had to do the best job she could with him. She had one other daughter that got onto drugs and other things, but they were able to rescue her and and she's successfully married now and doing good, which is excellent for Patty to be able to do that. And then her eldest daughter married, but kind of not the right guy too much, and so they've kind of divorced. And she has 4 children though, and we tried to help them out, and they're living in our basement right now. Her name is Cynthia. There's the 4 of them that are living there, and she's done amazingly well with that type of responsibility as a single mother. Wow. A lot of good things can be said about her.
And she's going to school to be a school teacher now.
Yeah, she's doing her best. She's, like she says, I'm trying, and she is. And then the next one is Heidi, and she married a very nice man, Jason Hamilton is his name, and they've done very well financially. They've done very well in the church, and they're active and doing a good, fine job.
Hey, Jason's been out of work for almost a month or a year.
Yeah, for almost a year.
We've been praying and hoping that this will be the week that he gets a yes.
That'd be great.
They have 3 daughters. The one was just
Yeah,
born.
that's right. They do, and they're a fine LDS and an active family. And then there's one more. There's Tricia, they call her. And
Well, Tiffany, you mentioned Tiffany, but
I mentioned Tiffany earlier as being the one that got on drugs and
right.
and got rescued.
Tiffany married Adam, and they live in Arizona.
Yeah. And they're doing quite well.
And Adam's just finishing up school.
Her husband is Adam Checketts, I guess.
Yeah, Dave Checkett's is his uncle.
And then this Tricia, the youngest, why, she's done okay and got a good husband, but they've had trouble in trying to find jobs and trying to make ends meet fully, and so they're still struggling along that line.
Tricia owns 2 salons and is an amazingly good cosmetologist.
Yeah, she is.
It's just she was running a really good Salt Lake salon before she got pregnant, and now she's 2 months pregnant and very sick.
Yeah.
And then Dad mentioned our son Joseph, who is in the Army now.
Yeah, he's in the Army now, and hopefully he'll have some of his disobedience removed by the rigors of Army life. Anyway, that's Patty's situation. And then Cindy, like I said, had no children. So then you go to Barton Howell, who died at age 7. Therefore, he has no children. So it brings you to the last 2, which is David and Ron. David Mark and Ronald Burton. And David Mark has 4 children. The one child has a different mother than the others, so. But they're doing all right. The other person that he had children by, seems to be a pretty stable and capable person. So does Dewey's child support requirements, and he brings this one, which is
Andrew.
name is
You mean Andrew?
huh?
Do you mean Andrew?
Andrew, yeah, his name was Andrew, and he doing pretty good, really. And the other children are pretty well married, or mostly raised. She's got one son, his oldest son, that I don't think is doing too good. Maybe he never will do very good. He's got some crazy deal where he spends all his life on computer games and stuff. Doesn't take life too seriously. Then got a girl that's got some pretty. Natasha is her name, and she has some pretty good features. She's a pretty decent person, I think. And then there's one more there. Jaden is his name. I don't know whether he's fully expressed himself as to what he's going to be when he gets a little bit older. I'm not sure. But he's coming along reasonably, I guess. Okay, well now that's David. Now the last one I've mentioned before is Ronald Burton. He has 8 children by 3 women.
And we have 9 more minutes left on our recording, so you have 1 minute per child.
Well, he's leaves something to be desired with all these women, but he's willing to spend a lot of time meeting his requirements there and providing for them. It's a good father and good provider, and well as he can possibly be without much responsibility. Okay, so that's them now.
Well, mention what Burton's children's names are. You got Cannon, and you got Ivory.
Oh yeah, the older ones that's pretty well raised are Cannon and Ivory and Ripley. Now the ones that aren't really too well raised are Tucker and Talon and Camilla and Roisin and also Stellar. That's the 5 of them, and they're all pretty young and are doing. RB Ron is trying to raise them best he can. Still a lot of challenges there, but he's coming along reasonably good. Okay?
Okay, so that's all we're going to do on this recording for right now, and then we'll pick it up later talking about other things.
Okay.
Thanks.